Hi, this is my project on news bias in the target audience. I'm Alex Beardmore. News bias, in and of itself, generally speaking, um, we can't avoid it. Uh, However, it's defined as prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. So generally, that's what's going on right now. Bias, in and of itself, is unavoidable, as we all have different views of the world. I may have one view and you may have another, and I will respect that. Journalists themselves have a story to tell with their view that can be described differently depending on the individual's worldview. What could be fact to one person can be belief to one person. What can be theory to one person is fact to another person, and that's our God-given right as a human being and First Amendment rights. The credibility of news organizations. As we know, the credibility of news organizations are under fire. Um, I read everything I see online or in the newspapers or even on TV with a grain of salt. So what do we determine as a credible news source? I did some research. According to the Pew Research Center, um, some they did 13 news organizations in a survey, um, and this was just recently, 2012. And the believability rating on a 4-point scale, um, it was more negative than positive for a lot of them. And a decade ago, the believability was 50 or 71%, sorry, and then 56% is what we have more currently based on the survey. And one question I have to ask is what causes this positive believability to drop? Um, there has to be something. Um, as we are all experiencing, journalism itself is evolving and trying to redefine itself in the wake of social media, news, um, through the internet. And that's just one thing that we're going to have to figure out. Um, One thing I think is a big problem right now is ethics in journalism. Um, I actually found a Society of Professional Journalists um, who's made a sort of code to protect the integrity of journalism and its First Amendment rights. Number one is seek truth and report it. Um, Number two, minimize harm. Number three, act independently. And four, be accountable and transparent. One of the one of the ones that I want to point out is number four, which is be accountable and transparent. Um, One thing that I have noticed in just researching this is most journalists don't stick to a set code of ethics, which means almost anything goes. There's so much shade and uh, just uncouth behavior going on in today's news. It's not transparent. Uh, there's major details left out. And news is catered to audiences and demographics that watch their specific brand. Um, such as Fox News, for example, is a target audience to the right. Many news stations actually target a specific demographic, primarily through political view or leaning. I actually found a couple tools that help me find out what the news bias is of a specific news source, and both of these are actually user user driven, which means it's driven by the leaders. Um, Fox News, right bias, we all know that. MSNBC has a left-leaning bias. NPR has a left-center, and according to media bias, The Economist also is right about in the middle, which means it doesn't really have a bias. It's all user-based. But where do we find balanced news? What if we don't want to read politically driven right or left biased news? Where do we get our news from? Um, and I'm sad to say, unfortunately, there isn't one specific website that I could send one to in my right mind to find balanced news. One thing I do is read multiple news sources, um, which especially in this age of fake news and all that jazz, I've had to learn to synthesize the news I read, which synthesization is I just go on different news websites and do a bit of digging further into the story just to find out just an overall picture that has been painted of what I uh, want to find out about the specific article. Um, I mean that's pretty much it. Thanks.